Hello there! Welcome to North America and the one WRC rally representing this continent more than any other, Mexico. This is episode 4 of the Country Guides, this time driving up and down a part of the Sierra Madre, the southern part of the North American Cordillera mountain chain. As a proving ground, I would recommend the stage El Mosquito here. It is one of the shortest, but combines several of Mexico's challenges: sharp and fast, water and dust, high and low. But first, some final basics. We looked at suspension and dampers in Finland, differentials in Croatia, gears in Sweden, and we will never look or touch the alignment. So the final area of tuning that remains is brakes. There are only 3 things to adjust, of which we will only look at the brake force and bias. The handbrake strength I would never touch. Usually you want your handbrake to lock your rear wheels, so as long as they always do that, I see no reason to touch the setting. For the other 2, the brake force is something I would touch rarely, Mexico being one of the exceptions. This setting controls how much bite your brake has and how easy it is to lock up. This is most noticeable if you drive without anti-lock brake assist. Everything the force setting does, you could do with the brake pedal as well. The purpose of this setting is more to not do that. Rather aim to use the same muscle memory everywhere, same pedal pressure to brake effectively. This trains your driving skills in consistency. So you'd want to lower the strength if you lock up the brakes constantly, and increase strength if you don't slow down as usual without locking the brakes. Most of the time, the default is nice already. The actual important thing in brake settings is the balance or brake bias. This sets up how much of your total braking you do at the front versus the rear of the car. When a car brakes, the weight shifts forward and presses the front wheels down, which gives them more grip than the rear and which allows them to do more braking. This is why most default settings have a slight bias to the front, because in that way you brake the best under normal conditions because you're using all of your available grip. Too much front bias might overload the grip levels at the front and lead to understeer. Too much rear bias can lead to oversteer if the rear wheels lock up under braking. This feels like an unwanted handbrake pull. So if your car does one or the other, shift the balance in the opposite direction. If it brakes nicely from the get-go, don't touch the brake settings. This concludes the general theory of tuning. Let's look at why I picked Mexico for explaining brakes. In Mexico, you have a lot of downhill braking because there is a lot of elevation change. You also have a lot of trail braking, where corners lead into each other, meaning you have no straight to brake before the corner, but actually need to brake for a sharp corner while still driving in an easier corner. And finally, most of the surface here is sand. The gravel tires dig in good, but it is still less grip than you have on regular gravel, and therefore your wheels lock up more easily. To counter all of this, I picked these settings for the brakes. A slightly reduced strength in brake force to compensate for the locking up, and a greatly shifted bias to the rear brakes. I'll try to show the effect in comparison. The gray-blue Ford here is driving with this custom brake settings. This white Ford is driving with a default setup. For default, you see that you lose a lot of steering authority under braking, sometimes sliding further than you want. Sometimes you need to step off the brakes to regain control and still slam sideways in a barrier. For the custom setting, the steering is not hampered under braking. You keep authority to turn in even under downhill braking. The price you pay for this control is brake distance. Since you put more load to the rear, the front tires never use their full grip potential for braking. In a straight line, this means you need longer brake distance than the default setup. But since the front wheels always have some grip left in reserve, you are actually able to use it for turning whenever needed, even while braking. And here, this trade-off is totally worth it. Even if it is hard to see in the video here, go try it yourself. Drive El Mosquito once with default brakes and once with my suggestion. Change nothing else. This will show you very nicely what the brake settings are about and what they affect in your driving. Now, further tuning for Mexico. I left alignment, differentials and gears on default. They felt good already. For the suspension, I paired a very high ride height together with fairly soft springs and balanced anti-roll bars. This works together with the dampers. These might remind you on the Croatia setup. Although the locations are very different, the damper logic is doing the same job. The normal road in Mexico is fairly smooth sand, so could actually be quite stiff in the setup. But there are so many things beside the roads. Rocks, earth ridges, cliffs, bushes, small walls, bridges, and so on. My goal was to be able to drive and cut across most of these things without breaking the car. That's why soft springs and very quick, fast bump dampers. They activate only at sudden shocks, but then they open up fully and let the wheel come up. This allows you to quite liberally drive across most of the road edges, where in Croatia the fast bump was only aimed to compensate for mistakes. Here it is aimed to allow the fastest line. Daring cuts, optimal racing lines are only possible here if you can drive across some of the roadside stuff. To still make the car handle nice on the fairly flat sand, I made the soft bump dampers and the rebound settings quite stiff, so despite the high ride height and the very soft springs, the car still handles nicely when there are no sudden bumps. Another note, to properly activate those bump settings so that the fast bump softens your spring up, you should approach those edges on the road exactly how you should not approach snowbanks in Sweden. So don't come at them fairly smooth and slowly, rather head on them head on. This will activate your fast bump setting consistently and raises up the wheel. Also, here is the leaderboard time for credibility supporting my claims here. That is it for setting up Mexico. Aim to keep control under braking and aim to be able to cut across things without crashing. Though there is more to Mexico than the setup, which brings us to the driving challenges. It is very technical here. And also quite, let's say, different. In terms of stage design, Mexico is exactly what Croatia is not. It has an epic long stage as a base, but many alternative paths and junctions where roads meet. This leads to a lot of variety in the smaller stages, as they often combine paths which are at different places for the very long stage. In Croatia, everything was just smaller cuts of the same long path. In Mexico, most stages change things, some alternative paths, alternative junctions, village sections or not, high speed past a junction or a hairpin at the same junction. This keeps you on your toes to listen carefully for the notes. You can't really rely on learning the stage. You need to listen, which I find very awesome. This is how I imagine a good splitting of an epic long stage to be done in the rally spirit. For keeping control, be liberal with the handbrake here. It can often throw the car around in technical areas to regain the best line. Be cautious with some blind crests, as you need to be very precise with some of them. And also try to be extra careful with your damage. Mexico is very high in altitude and also warm, so any damage to your radiator is multiplied here compared to other locations. Your engine has less air density and less cooling, so keep that radiator going. Finally, water fording. We have the highest amount of water splashes here, ironically at the driest location of Dirt Rally 3. Theory for water crossings is as follows: full throttle and no shifting while in the water. This keeps the nose up, keeps water from the windscreen, and has the least resistance. If you brake into a water splash, your nose acts as a plow and brakes you almost to a standstill by pushing water away. So, whenever possible, try to shift in a gear where you have good power but won't redline while in the ford. You can shift as soon as you exit the water on the other side and wipe that window if needed. So, keep it in one piece, liberal handbrake use, big amounts of caution, and focused listening to the notes. Hope this was helpful for you. Give the tips in setup and driving a try, and tell me if something remains unclear. Now, since this concludes the basics of tuning at appropriate locations, next in the series we will dive into the most difficult locations for each surface. This means Norway for snow, Corsica for tarmac, and starting up next with Kenya for the heaviest gravel. Until then, have a great day, tranquil madness.